My name is Elena Martinez. I'm 29 years old. And for almost 4 years, my parents called every job I applied to and told them I had a criminal record. I didn't. I've never been arrested. I've never been charged with anything. I've never even gotten a speeding ticket. But by the time I turned 28, I was sleeping on a thin mattress in a women's shelter outside Flagstaff, Arizona, washing my hair in a truck stop bathroom sink twice a week, and eating exactly one hot meal a day because no employer within 50 miles would hire me. Every Sunday night, like clockwork, my dad would send the same message. Come home. Apologize. Maybe we can fix this. Then one Monday morning, a woman knocked on the shelter door and said 6 words that changed everything. Your grandmother asked me to find you. Before I tell you what she brought with her that morning, take a second to subscribe to Women Reddit Stories if you enjoy real stories like this. And drop a comment telling me what time it is where you're listening from right now. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me take you back to San Pedro Valley, Arizona, the week after my 26th birthday. The week I decided I wasn't going to ask permission to live my life anymore. San Pedro Valley is the kind of town where everyone knows the make and model of your truck before they know your name. Population, a little under 5,000. 1 grocery store. 1 high school. 1 diner that's been serving the same green chili omelet since the 1980s. If someone buys a new mailbox, the whole town knows about it before dinner. The Martinez family, that was us. My father, Daniel Martinez, worked as a supervisor at a copper processing plant about 15 minutes outside town. He'd been there for 22 years before the company downsized. My mother, Rosa, volunteered every Sunday at the church food pantry and baked enough casseroles every winter to feed half the county. On paper, we were the family people pointed to when they said things like, "See? That's how you raise a daughter right." Behind the front door, things worked a little differently. I didn't have my own house key until I was 19. I wasn't allowed to drive farther than 15 miles without telling my parents where I was going, who I'd be with, and when I'd be back. When I was 15, I started working weekends at Lily's diner bussing tables. Minimum wage. Nothing special. But every paycheck went straight into a bank account my mom opened for safekeeping. I never saw the statements. I never asked. That's just how things worked. I graduated second in my class. My guidance counselor pulled me aside during senior year and told me I had a real chance at scholarships if I applied to a few universities in Phoenix. I brought the brochures home one evening and set them on the kitchen table. My dad looked at the stack for about 2 seconds before sliding them aside. "College is for people who don't know how to work," he said. That was the end of the conversation. So I stayed. I helped my mom cook dinner every night. I cleaned the house. I took care of the yard. And every evening my father would sit at the head of the table and talk about how the world outside San Pedro Valley was dangerous. Crime. Drugs. People who didn't care about family. Then he'd look across the table at me and say the same sentence he'd been saying since I turned 18. You've got food, a roof, and people who love you. What else do you need? For a long time, I didn't know how to answer that. The week after I turned 26, something shifted. There wasn't a fight. No dramatic argument. I was standing at the sink washing dishes after dinner. The same sink. The same dishes. The same kitchen I'd been standing in since I was a kid. And a thought dropped into my head so suddenly it almost scared me. If I don't leave now, I'm going to be standing in this exact spot when I'm 40. The next morning I walked 3 blocks to the San Pedro Public Library and sat down at one of the old desktop computers near the back wall. The kind with sticky keyboards and a 15-minute timer. I created a brand new email address. Not the shared family one my parents monitored. Just one for me. Then I searched for jobs. I found a listing for a hardware supply store in Sierra Vista, about 25 minutes away. Full-time sales associate. Benefits after 90 days. I typed out my application slowly with 2 fingers. Then I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. 2 days later I got an email. They wanted to interview me. Thursday morning. 10 a.m. I read the message 4 times. My hands were shaking when I closed the computer and walked home. Not because I was scared. Because for the first time in years, I felt something that had been missing for a long time. Hope. Dinner that night was strangely quiet. My mom washed dishes that were already clean. My dad sat at the table reading the newspaper. He looked at me once. Just once. The next morning I drove to Sierra Vista for the interview. The manager met me at the door and shook my hand. His name was Greg. Mid-50s. Reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck. He smiled at first. But when we sat down across from each other in his office, the smile disappeared. "Elena," he said slowly, "I'm going to ask you something directly." "Okay." He tapped a printed copy of my application on the desk. "Is there anything in your background we should know about?" I blinked. "No, sir." He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We received a call yesterday," he said. "Someone said you have a felony theft charge." The room tilted sideways. "That's not true," I said immediately. "I've never been arrested." Greg looked at me like he wanted to believe me. But he also had a business to run. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "We can't move forward." I drove home without turning on the radio. Just the sound of tires on asphalt and the white lines sliding past under the desert sun. When I pulled into our driveway, my dad was sitting on the porch with his newspaper. He didn't look up. "How was your day?" he asked. I stood there for a second holding my car keys. "Fine," I said. He turned a page. "Good." Inside, my mom had already set the table for dinner. Pot roast. Green beans. Iced tea. No one mentioned the interview. No one asked about Sierra Vista. But somewhere between the green beans and dessert, a thought started forming in my head. Small. Ugly. Impossible. Did they know? I pushed it away. They were my parents. Parents don't do things like that. At least that's what I told myself. For about 2 weeks. Until it happened again. And again. And again. By the time the 4th job interview disappeared the exact same way, I stopped pretending it was a coincidence. And that's when I started asking the question that changed everything. Who was making those phone calls? And why were they so determined to keep me from ever leaving home? Over the next 5 weeks, I applied to 3 more jobs. One at a grocery store in Bisbee. One at a warehouse just outside Tombstone. And one at a diner in Huachuca City that needed a morning shift waitress. All 3 places called me back. All 3 scheduled interviews. And all 3 canceled within 48 hours. At first the excuses sounded normal. The grocery store said the position had been filled. The warehouse never called again. But the diner was different. The owner was a woman named Marjorie, and she'd been running that place for almost 30 years. When I walked in for the interview, she smiled warmly and poured me a cup of coffee before we even started talking. But halfway through the conversation her expression shifted. She leaned across the table and lowered her voice. "Can I ask you something, honey?" "Sure." She hesitated. Then she said it. "Did you get into some trouble with the law recently?" My stomach dropped. "No." She studied my face for a moment. "Because someone called here yesterday," she said quietly. "Said you had a fraud charge and that I should be careful hiring you." The coffee in my hand suddenly felt too heavy. "Did they say who they were?" I asked. Marjorie nodded slowly. She said she was a concerned neighbor. I drove home that afternoon with a knot in my chest that wouldn't go away. Concerned neighbor. It sounded familiar. Too familiar. When I pulled into the driveway, my father's truck was parked out front. My mom was inside the kitchen chopping vegetables. Everything looked completely normal. The same quiet house. The same routine. The same smell of dinner cooking. But that phrase kept echoing in my head. Concerned neighbor. That night I waited until both of them went to bed. Our house had thin walls, and I knew the exact moment the hallway went quiet. I slipped out of my room and walked down the hallway to the one room my mother always kept locked when guests came over. Her sewing room. The door wasn't locked that night. I pushed it open slowly. The room smelled like fabric softener and old thread. Her sewing machine sat on the desk next to stacks of neatly folded cloth. I walked over to the desk and opened the top drawer. Inside were the usual things. Scissors. Spools of thread. A measuring tape. And a small red notebook. Something about it made my stomach tighten. I opened it. My mother's handwriting covered the pages. Neat. Careful. The same cursive she used on birthday cards. Down the left side of the page were names of businesses. Greg's Hardware, Sierra Vista. Bisbee Market. Tombstone Freight Warehouse. Marjorie's Diner. And beside each one, a check mark. In red ink. My heart started pounding. I flipped to the next page. More names. More check marks. Every single place I had applied to. Every interview. Every opportunity. Tracked. Like a list. Like something she was managing. My hands started shaking. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't bad luck. This was intentional. My mother had been keeping track of my job applications. Which meant one thing. She knew where I was applying. And if she knew, then someone in this house had been making those phone calls. I closed the notebook slowly and put it back exactly where I found it. Then I walked back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a minute. I just stared at the ceiling and kept asking myself the same question over and over again. Why? Why would my parents sabotage every chance I had to get a job? The next morning I placed the red notebook in the center of the kitchen table. My mom was pouring coffee. My dad was reading the newspaper. The radio was playing an old country song quietly in the background. Everything felt normal. Except the notebook sitting between us. Mom, I said. She looked down. Her hand froze halfway through pouring coffee. The pot tilted slightly and a small stream spilled onto the counter. What's this? I asked. Her eyes moved from the notebook to my face. You went through my things, she said quietly. You called my employers. Her voice cracked. I did it because I love you. I stared at her. You told them I had a criminal record. The world out there is dangerous, she said quickly. You don't understand what could happen to a girl alone. I'm 26. You're still my daughter. My father folded his newspaper slowly. We're protecting you, he said calmly. You're ruining my life, I said. You think you can survive out there, he replied. You can't even manage your own finances. I've never been allowed to. That's because we take care of you. Something inside my chest snapped. If you don't stop, I said, I'm leaving. My father didn't blink. You walk out that door, he said evenly, you walk out with nothing. I thought he was bluffing. I packed that night anyway. 1 backpack. 2 changes of clothes. My phone charger. And a photo of my grandmother Lucia that I kept in a drawer beside my bed. When I opened the front door, my mom was standing in the hallway. Her arms were crossed. The tears from earlier were gone. If you leave, she said quietly, don't come back. My father stood behind her like a wall. I stepped onto the porch and pulled out my phone. I opened my banking app. Balance, $0. Every paycheck I had ever earned. Every tip from the diner. Every birthday check from my grandmother. Gone. My mom had been on the account since I was 16. She didn't need my permission to empty it. I need my birth certificate, I said. And my social security card. My father shook his head. Those belong to this house. Then he closed the screen door. I walked down the driveway at 10:12 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. I had a backpack. A phone with 14% battery. And $17 in my pocket. No ID. No plan. No place to go. I walked 3 miles to a gas station outside town and sat on the curb under the fluorescent lights. Cars came and went. A truck driver bought coffee. The cashier glanced at me once through the window and then looked away. At 11:03 p.m. my phone buzzed. A text from my dad. Come home. Apologize. Maybe we can fix this. I turned the phone off. Not because I was brave. Because the battery was about to die. I had $17. Nowhere to sleep. And no idea what the next day would look like. But for the first time in my entire life, no one was telling me where I was allowed to go. 2 days later, a woman behind that same gas station counter slid a napkin across the register toward me. An address was written on it. Flagstaff Women's Community Shelter. That's how I found bed number 9. And that's where the real fight began. The Flagstaff Women's Community Shelter sat on the edge of an industrial district just past the railroad tracks. From the outside it looked like an old warehouse someone had forgotten about. Gray concrete walls. A dented metal door. 2 narrow windows with bars across them. Inside, it was warmer than I expected. 20 beds arranged in 2 long rows. A shared bathroom at the back. A kitchen that smelled like reheated soup and industrial cleaner. The fluorescent lights hummed all night. The woman who ran the place was named Linda Harper. Early 50s. Short brown hair. Reading glasses she kept pushing up her nose every few minutes. When I walked in that first morning, she didn't ask me the question everyone else had asked since I left home. What happened to you? Instead, she handed me a folded towel and pointed to a bed near the back wall. Bed 9 is open, she said. Then she looked at me for a moment and added quietly, You don't have to explain why you're here. You just have to decide what you're going to do next. I slept for 14 hours that first day. When I woke up, the shelter was quiet. A woman across the room was folding laundry. Another sat near the window reading a paperback book with half the cover torn off. I was the youngest person there by at least 15 years. Most of the residents were women who had been through things they didn't talk about. Divorces. Evictions. Family situations that had gone wrong in ways you couldn't fix with an apology. I spent the first week doing whatever I could to stay busy. Sweeping floors. Washing dishes. Organizing the pantry shelves. If you helped around the shelter, Linda made sure you got an extra meal. It wasn't much, but it was enough. At the same time, I started the process of replacing my documents. The birth certificate application went through the county office. 6 to 8 weeks, they told me. The DMV was harder. Without my social security card or proof of residence, every visit ended the same way. Come back when you have more documentation. So I waited. And while I waited, I applied for jobs. This time farther away. 30 miles. 40 miles. Places my parents had never heard of in towns they'd probably never visit. I told myself distance would fix the problem. If I went far enough, their reach would finally end. I was wrong about that too. The restaurant was in Williams, about 45 miles west. Family-owned place. Checkered tablecloths. Handwritten specials on a whiteboard near the door. They needed a hostess. I applied online from the library computer and got an interview 2 days later. I borrowed a blouse from another woman at the shelter, caught the county bus at 5:30 in the morning, and walked the last mile to the restaurant. The manager was a man named Paul. Friendly, soft-spoken. He shook my hand and told me they'd call by the end of the week. Thursday morning my phone rang. I answered before the second ring. Elena? Yes. There was a pause on the other end. I'm sorry, Paul said. We decided to go another direction. My stomach dropped. Can I ask why? Another pause. A longer one. Then he said something that made the room spin. Someone emailed us a document about you. A document? Looked like a police report. I sat down on the edge of my shelter bed. A police report? I repeated. Yeah, he said. It said you'd been arrested for fraud last year. I stared at the floor. I've never been arrested, I said quietly. I figured, he replied. But I have to protect my business. The call ended 30 seconds later. I didn't move for a long time after that. Because something had changed. The phone calls had turned into something else. Something bigger. Someone had created documents. Fake ones. Official-looking ones. The kind with headers and formatting that made them look real at first glance. My father had spent 2 decades managing employees and writing reports. He knew how to make paperwork look convincing. And now he was using that knowledge to make sure no one hired me. That night, as I sat on bed 9 staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. But the message had a rhythm I recognized immediately. Cold out there yet? You know your room is still here. Just say you're sorry. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I deleted the message. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I had started to understand something. Those messages weren't invitations. They were reminders. Reminders that they believed I would eventually break. That sooner or later I would come home and apologize for trying to leave. The messages came once a week after that. Always from different numbers. Always the same tone. Your mother made enchiladas tonight. The house feels empty without you. Come home and we can fix this. Each message felt like a hook trying to pull me backward. But something else had started bothering me too. Something Linda mentioned one evening while we were cleaning the kitchen. Elena, she said casually, a woman came by last week asking about you. I stopped stacking plates. A woman? Yeah. Said she was looking for you. What did she look like? Linda shrugged. Mid-50s maybe. Short gray hair. Very calm. My stomach tightened. What did she want? She asked if you were staying here. And what did you tell her? Linda gave me a look that was almost offended. I told her shelter policy doesn't allow us to confirm residence. Did she say why she was looking for me? She said she had something important to deliver. Linda wiped her hands on a towel and reached into the pocket of her cardigan. She left this. She handed me a small white card. The edges were slightly bent. Printed in simple black letters were 3 lines. Ruth Caldwell. Licensed private investigator. State of Arizona. I read it twice. A private investigator. My first thought was immediate. My parents had hired someone. They were trying to track me down. Find out where I was living. Maybe drag me home. What did she seem like? I asked quietly. Linda thought for a moment. Honestly, she said. She didn't seem like someone working against you. She seemed like someone trying to help. I slipped the card into my pocket. But I didn't call the number. Not that day. Not the next one either. Because every time I pulled the card out to look at it, the same thought came into my head. My parents had already outmaneuvered me at every turn. They'd taken my money. My documents. My reputation. If this investigator was another move in their plan, I wasn't going to walk into it blindly. Still, I didn't throw the card away. I kept it in my pocket. And every time I did laundry at the shelter, I moved it into the next pair of jeans. Something about it didn't fit the pattern. My parents operated in the shadows. Anonymous emails. Fake reports. Hidden phone calls. This woman had walked up to the front door in the middle of the afternoon. Left her name. Left her number. And asked for me directly. That wasn't how my parents worked. 3 months passed. Slowly, things started improving. My replacement birth certificate finally arrived. The DMV issued me a temporary ID. For the first time in my adult life, I held a government card with my name and photo that no one else controlled. It felt like a small victory. But victories at that stage were rare. Then one afternoon Linda called me into her office. The door was closed. That never happened. Her office door was usually propped open with a brick someone had painted blue. "Sit down," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. But it was serious. "I got a phone call today." My stomach tightened. "From who?" "A woman claiming to be a social worker." The room suddenly felt colder. "She said you have a documented history of violence," Linda continued carefully. "And that you might be a risk to other residents." I stared at her. "That was my mother," I said quietly. Linda nodded. "I figured." "What did you tell her?" "I told her shelter policy doesn't allow us to discuss residents." She leaned forward slightly. "But I need to be honest with you. If she contacts the county and files a formal complaint." Her voice trailed off. "I might not be able to keep your bed here." I sat there in silence. My parents had sabotaged my jobs. Stolen my savings. Faked police reports. And now they were trying to take away the only place I had to sleep. For a long time I had reacted with fear. With anger. With desperation. But sitting in that small office, something inside me changed. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a quiet shift. Like a switch flipping. I was done reacting. It was time to start planning. And that meant there was one phone call I could no longer avoid. That night, sitting on bed 9 with the shelter lights buzzing overhead, I pulled the business card out of my pocket. And for the first time, I dialed the number printed on it. She arrived the next morning at exactly 8:03 a.m. I know the time because I had been staring at the clock on the shelter wall for almost 20 minutes waiting. The shelter was quiet that morning. Most of the women had already left for day labor programs or job searches. Only a few of us were still there. When the front door opened, Linda stepped inside first. Behind her walked a woman who looked exactly the way Linda had described. Mid-50s. Short gray hair cut neatly at the jawline. No jewelry. No unnecessary expression. She wore a dark blue jacket and carried a brown leather briefcase that looked like it had been in use for decades. Linda nodded toward me. "Elena," she said. "This is the woman who came looking for you." The woman walked toward my bed and stopped a few feet away. "Elena Martinez?" she asked. "That's me." She studied my face carefully for a moment, like she was comparing it to a memory. Then she set the briefcase down on the mattress between us. "My name is Ruth Caldwell," she said calmly. "I'm a licensed private investigator in the state of Arizona." I didn't say anything. My arms were folded across my chest. I was waiting. Waiting for the part where she told me my parents had hired her. But that part never came. Instead, she rested one hand on the briefcase and said something I never expected. "Your grandmother hired me." The words didn't register at first. "My grandmother?" "Lucia Martinez," she said. The name hit me like cold water. My grandmother had died almost 4 years earlier. Heart failure. Quick. Quiet. Exactly the way she always said she wanted to go. She hired you when? I asked slowly. Ruth opened the clasp on the briefcase. 10 years ago. I stared at her. 10? You were 19 at the time. She opened the briefcase fully and turned it so I could see inside. On the very top was a cream-colored envelope. My name was written across it in familiar cursive. Elena Martinez. The handwriting was unmistakable. My grandmother's. The air left my lungs. Ruth spoke gently. Your grandmother paid me a long-term retainer 10 years ago. My job was to monitor certain activities involving your parents. I looked up at her. You've been watching them for 10 years? Not constantly, she said. But periodically. Why? Ruth tapped the envelope lightly. Because she asked me to deliver this to you if things ever reached a certain point. I picked up the envelope slowly. My fingers were shaking. The paper felt older than it should have. Like it had been waiting for a very long time. When did you know? I asked quietly. That it was time to find you? Ruth leaned back slightly. When your mother called the shelter pretending to be a social worker. My head snapped up. You knew about that? I've been tracking the phone calls to your employers for the last 2 years. The room felt suddenly smaller. How many? I asked. 37, she said. 37 separate contacts. She opened the briefcase wider and revealed a thick manila folder beneath the envelope. I recorded several of them, she continued. Others I documented through call logs and transcripts. My hands were trembling now. And the fake police reports? I asked. Ruth nodded. I have copies of those as well. I stared down at the envelope again. My grandmother had known. Not just suspected. Known. 10 years earlier. She had seen something coming long before it happened. Go ahead, Ruth said quietly. Open it. I slid a finger under the edge of the envelope and pulled out the letter inside. The paper smelled faintly like old books. The same scent her house used to have. I unfolded it slowly. Her handwriting filled the page. Elena. If you are reading this, things have gotten worse than I hoped they would. I'm sorry I couldn't stop your father while I was alive. I tried. I spent 30 years married to a man just like him, your grandfather, and I know how these patterns repeat. Control can look like love if you grow up inside it long enough. But it isn't love. So I made a plan. Inside the case Ruth brought you is everything you need to protect yourself. Use it wisely. Don't use it for revenge. Use it for freedom. I love you more than I was ever allowed to say out loud. Grandma Lucia. My vision blurred. I lowered the letter slowly. Ruth gave me a moment before opening the folder inside the briefcase. 5 years of documentation, she said. She placed the file on the bed and opened it. Inside were neatly organized sections separated by colored tabs. Recordings of phone calls. Transcripts. Email screenshots. Call logs. Each one labeled with a date and time. I flipped through the first few pages. My mother's voice stared back at me in black ink. Hello, I'm calling as a concerned neighbor. You should be careful hiring Elena Martinez. There was an incident involving theft. 37 times. 37 chances at a job destroyed. Ruth flipped to another section. Here, she said. Photos. Images of the notebook I had found in my mother's sewing room. Taken through the kitchen window. Dates written beside them. Proof. Real proof. I looked up at Ruth. Is this admissible in court? Every piece of it, she said. Arizona is a one-party consent state for recordings. And as a licensed investigator, I maintain documented chain of custody. I closed the folder slowly. Then Ruth reached back into the briefcase. There's one more thing. She pulled out a large yellow envelope sealed with a wax stamp. In the corner was a law office name. Law Office of Michael Anders, Flagstaff, Arizona. My heart started pounding again. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were legal documents. Trust paperwork. Financial statements. I scanned the top page. Then I read the number printed near the bottom. Then I read it again. $312,000. I looked up at Ruth. My grandmother sold her house 10 years ago, she said. She placed the proceeds into a trust. I stared at the number again. The trust matured after conservative investments and interest, Ruth continued. And the sole beneficiary? She pointed at the document. Is you. My hands were numb. My parents don't know about this? No, Ruth said. Your grandmother specifically instructed the attorney to have no contact with them under any circumstances. I sat there staring at the paperwork. A decade. My grandmother had planned this for a decade. Why didn't she give it to me earlier? I asked. Ruth smiled slightly. She left an explanation. She pulled out another folded note. I opened it. 2 short sentences. If I give Elena the money now, Daniel will find a way to take it. She has to need it first. The room fell completely silent. My grandmother had known exactly how my father worked. Every move. Every manipulation. And she had waited until the moment I needed help the most. Ruth closed the briefcase gently. When you're ready, she said, we can visit the attorney who manages the trust. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my temporary ID. The one I had fought 3 months to get. I think, I said slowly. I'm ready now. Because for the first time since I walked out of my parents' house, I finally had something they could never take away. Proof. The law office was above a small insurance agency in downtown Flagstaff. You had to climb a narrow wooden staircase to get there. At the top was a frosted glass door with gold lettering. Michael Anders, attorney at law. The waiting room was simple. 2 chairs. A wooden desk. And a tall plant that looked like it had survived several decades without enthusiasm. Ruth knocked once and opened the door. A man in his early 60s stood up behind the desk when we entered. Thin build. Gray hair. Wire-rimmed glasses that rested low on his nose. Elena Martinez? He asked. Yes. He walked around the desk and shook my hand with both of his. Your grandmother talked about you often, he said warmly. Please, sit. I sat down slowly while Ruth placed the briefcase on the desk. Mr. Anders opened a file drawer and pulled out a folder already labeled with my name. Everything about the room felt calm. Organized. Like someone had been preparing for this meeting for a long time. He examined my temporary ID first. Then he compared it to the copy of my birth certificate I had received by mail 2 weeks earlier. Everything matched. After a moment he nodded. Well, he said quietly. It appears everything is in order. He slid a stack of papers toward me. The trust your grandmother created became fully accessible upon verification of your identity. My heart was beating hard again. Meaning? He smiled gently. Meaning you now have full access to the funds. I stared at the number printed on the page. $300,000. A year earlier I had been worried about paying for groceries. Now a single document had changed everything. But Mr. Anders didn't look surprised. He simply handed me a pen. Sign here. My hand didn't shake when I signed. That surprised me more than anything else. Because the moment didn't feel dramatic. It felt quiet. Like something inevitable had finally arrived. When the paperwork was finished, Mr. Anders leaned back in his chair. There's something else your grandmother asked me to do if this moment ever came. He opened a drawer and removed a business card. Lucia believed you might need legal protection before you needed the money. He slid the card across the desk. Sarah Whitman, civil litigation. I picked it up. Defamation, Mr. Anders continued. Harassment. Interference with employment. He looked at Ruth's folder. Based on the evidence Ruth has gathered, you likely have grounds for all three. I looked at the card. Then at the folder full of recordings and transcripts. Then back at him. Do you think I should call her? I asked. Mr. Anders answered without hesitation. Yes. Sarah Whitman's office was only 10 minutes away. Ruth drove. We arrived at 2:05 p.m. Sarah was younger than I expected. Late 30s. Sharp eyes. A calm voice that didn't waste words. She spent nearly 2 hours reviewing the contents of Ruth's evidence file. The recordings. The call logs. The fabricated police reports. The screenshots of emails traced back to my parents' home internet. When she finished reading, she leaned back in her chair. This is textbook defamation, she said. Specifically defamation per essay. I frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means falsely stating someone committed a crime, she explained. In Arizona, that's automatically considered harmful to a person's reputation. She tapped the folder. You wouldn't even need to prove damages. Then she looked at me. But in your case, we have 3 years of them. I swallowed. So what happens next? She smiled slightly. We file a lawsuit. The papers were filed that same week. My father was served on a Monday morning at 8:11 a.m. A process server walked up the driveway of the house I grew up in and handed him the envelope while he was checking the mailbox. 2 neighbors witnessed it. By lunchtime, half of San Pedro Valley had heard about it. My mother was served an hour later at the grocery store. Right there in the produce section. 3 members of her church cooking group were standing nearby when it happened. By evening, the entire town knew. My phone rang 14 times that afternoon. I didn't answer. Sarah had given me strict instructions. All communication goes through legal counsel now. At 6:42 p.m. a text message came through. You're making a mistake. I'm your father. Sarah printed it out. Exhibit 41, she said. The next day my mother began calling neighbors. She cried during every conversation. Every story sounded the same. Our daughter is suing us because we loved her too much. But something had already started changing. Court filings are public records. And people in small towns read them the same way they read church bulletins. Carefully. Thoroughly. Within 3 days, someone at Lily's Diner had printed out the complaint. The first page alone listed the evidence. 37 calls to employers. 5 fabricated police reports. 1 impersonation of a social worker. 3 years of documented interference with employment. The story started spreading quickly. But this time the facts were attached. And facts traveled differently than rumors. A man named Tom Gallagher, who had lived 2 houses down from my parents for nearly 20 years, ran into my mother at the gas station. Rosa, he asked carefully. Did you really call Elena's employers? She didn't answer. She got in her car and drove away. My father did exactly what I expected him to do. He signed up to speak at the next town council meeting. The same podium he had used once before to tell everyone how worried he was about his daughter. This time the room was packed. At least 60 people. Some standing along the back wall. Some sitting in folding chairs. I sat in the 3rd row beside Sarah. My father walked to the podium at 7:14 p.m. Most of you know me, he began. I've lived here my whole life. He talked about the community. About family. About how outside influences were destroying something that should have been handled privately. Then he looked directly at me. My daughter has been manipulated by people who don't understand our family. The room went quiet. Then Sarah stood up calmly. "My name is Sarah Whitman," she said. "I represent Elena Martinez." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply said one sentence. "The full complaint and all supporting evidence are public record and available for anyone who wishes to review them." Then she sat back down. 8 seconds of silence followed. I counted them. The council chairman cleared his throat and moved on to the next agenda item. My father stayed at the podium a moment longer. Then he stepped away. He didn't look at me again. And for the first time in my life, he looked unsure. The civil protection order was granted 12 days later. 500 feet. No direct contact. No phone calls. No texts. No emails. No messages through neighbors, friends, relatives, or anyone else acting on their behalf. The judge read the order slowly, making sure every word was clear. My parents sat on the opposite side of the courtroom. My father's arms were folded the entire time. My mother stared down at the table like the surface might open up and swallow her. When the hearing ended, Sarah leaned toward me and whispered. That was the easy part. She was right. The defamation case was just beginning. But the evidence was overwhelming. Sarah submitted everything Ruth had gathered. The recordings. The transcripts. The fake police reports. The email metadata that traced anonymous messages back to my parents' home internet connection. 37 separate calls to employers. 3 years of sabotage. 2 weeks later, my father hired an attorney from another county. A tired-looking man who seemed uncomfortable the moment he opened the evidence file. He lasted exactly 9 days. Then he called Sarah and quietly recommended that my parents settle the case. My father refused. "I'm not paying my own daughter," he reportedly said. The attorney withdrew from the case 2 days later. After that, my father tried representing himself. He filed exactly one document. A handwritten response that read, "This is a family matter and the court has no jurisdiction over a father protecting his child." The judge disagreed. The first hearing date arrived 3 weeks later. My father didn't show up. Sarah stood calmly and requested a default judgment. The judge reviewed the evidence again. Then he granted it. Defamation per se. Tortious interference with employment. Documented damages based on 3 years of lost income and reputation harm. Total judgment, $92,000. My father didn't pay. So Sarah filed a lien on the house. The house on Cottonwood Street. The same one where I grew up. The same porch where my father used to sit with his newspaper pretending nothing was happening inside the walls. The same kitchen where my mother kept her notebook of check marks. I was sitting in Michael Anders' office when the court notification came through. He printed the ruling and slid it across the desk. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about the question for a moment. "Tired," I said. And I meant it. 3 years of my life had disappeared. 8 months in a shelter bed. Hundreds of nights wondering if I had made the worst decision of my life. Victory didn't feel dramatic. It felt quiet. Like finally putting down something heavy you'd been carrying for too long. That same week something unexpected happened. Michael Anders watched me organize the evidence files Sarah had been using. I had created timelines. Cross-referenced call logs. Labeled recordings. He leaned against his desk watching me work. "You ever considered office administration?" he asked. I looked up. "Not really." "Well," he said, "I'm hiring." He gestured toward the desk by the window. "My last assistant retired 2 months ago." "What would I be doing?" "Exactly what you're doing now." He shrugged. "Organizing chaos." I started the following Monday. $18 an hour. Benefits after 60 days. A desk by the window. And a small fern that needed watering every other day. With the trust funds my grandmother left, I rented a one-bedroom apartment in Flagstaff. Ground floor. Small kitchen. A front door with a lock and a key that belonged only to me. The first night I slept there felt strange. Too quiet. No footsteps in the hallway. No voices through the walls. No one checking what time I came home. The quiet felt enormous. I bought a used Toyota Corolla with 130,000 miles on it. Nothing fancy. But it started every morning. I opened a bank account with only my name on it. And one afternoon I walked into a grocery store and filled a cart with food. No permission. No explanations. Just groceries. Standing in the checkout line, I realized something. I had never done this before. Not once in 28 years. Meanwhile, things in San Pedro Valley were changing. Public records have a way of spreading through small towns. People read. People talk. Slowly at first. Then all at once. The truth began surfacing. The owner of the diner where I once worked told customers about the phone call he received warning him not to hire me. The warehouse manager found the fake police report email still sitting in his inbox. Greg from the hardware store remembered the exact day my father called. One by one, people started comparing stories. And the math stopped adding up. My mother felt the shift first. Her church cooking group quietly asked her to take a break from the weekly meetings. Just until things settled down. Things were not going to settle down. Then my father walked into the coffee shop where he had eaten breakfast every morning for 15 years. His usual booth was empty. But no one joined him. The waitress refilled his coffee without starting a conversation. For the first time, people looked at him differently. Not with respect. With questions. A week later, his neighbor Tom knocked on their door. "I've known you 30 years, Daniel," he said carefully. My father stood in the doorway. "Did you really fake those police reports?" My father closed the door without answering. The legal side moved quickly after that. 2 employers volunteered to testify. They still had copies of the emails. Call logs. Notes. Evidence. Sarah barely had to lift a finger. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post anything online. I didn't knock on doors explaining my side of the story. I didn't need to. The evidence existed. And people could read. The truth didn't need a speech. It just needed access. Eventually the house on Cottonwood Street went up for sale. My father didn't have a choice. The lien meant the judgment had to be paid before the property could transfer. The house sold for $174,000. After realtor fees, taxes, and the $92,000 judgment. My parents walked away with very little. They moved into a trailer park outside Prescott Valley. About 30 minutes away. Far enough that most of their old neighbors stopped seeing them. But close enough that the grocery store cashiers still recognized them. My father never admitted he was wrong. Not once. To anyone. The story he tells now is simple. My daughter was manipulated by lawyers. He'll probably keep telling that story for the rest of his life. Some people would rather lose everything than admit they were the villain. 3 months after the court ruling, a letter arrived at the law office. Michael Anders walked it over to my desk that afternoon. "It came through regular mail," he said, placing the envelope down carefully. "Addressed to you." I looked at the return address. It was from San Pedro Valley. My chest tightened. My parents didn't know where I lived. The protection order had prevented them from contacting me directly. But the letter had been sent to my old address, the one I used before leaving home. Someone at the shelter must have forwarded it after seeing my name. Michael didn't say anything else. He simply left the envelope on my desk and walked back to his office. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The handwriting on the front was familiar. My mother's. Neat. Careful. Exactly the same as the writing in the notebook she used to track my job applications. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single page. Dear Elena, I'm your mother. I will always be your mother. Your father says he's sorry. Thanksgiving is coming soon. We should sit down as a family and put this behind us. Come home for dinner. Love. Mom. I read it twice. Then a third time. One sentence kept standing out. Your father says he's sorry. Not your father is sorry. Not we're sorry. Just. He says he is. Like she was passing along a message from someone who couldn't be bothered to write it himself. Then there was the other line. We should put this behind us. Like everything that had happened was a disagreement about politics. Like it hadn't taken 3 years of my life. Like I hadn't slept in a shelter bed for 8 months because of the lies they told. I sat there for almost an hour thinking about that letter. Thinking about everything that had happened. The phone calls. The fake police reports. The night I walked away with $17 and a dying phone battery. The moment Ruth placed my grandmother's briefcase on that shelter bed. Eventually I stood up, walked down the hallway, and knocked on Michael Anders' office door. He looked up from his desk. Everything all right? I handed him the letter. Technically they sent it to my old address, I said. But it feels like a violation. He read it quickly. You're correct, he said. The protection order doesn't cover letters sent indirectly like this. I nodded. But any response should go through legal counsel, he added. Which means you write it for me, I said. He smiled slightly. Exactly. The response went out 2 days later. Typed. Professional. Delivered through legal channels. It read, Mrs. Martinez. Elena Martinez acknowledges receipt of your letter. She wishes you well but does not wish to resume contact. The events that led to the court judgment were serious and caused substantial harm to her life and livelihood. Respectfully, she requests that you comply with the court order and refrain from further attempts at communication. Attorney Michael Anders. That was it. No anger. No accusations. Just a boundary. When I dropped the envelope in the mailbox outside the post office that afternoon, I felt something strange. Relief. Not because the situation was over, but because for the first time in my life, I had drawn the line myself. Life settled into something quieter after that. My job at the law office became routine. Case files. Calendars. Deadlines. The kind of work that requires patience and attention to detail. The kind of work I discovered I was actually very good at. In the evenings, I started taking community college classes. Basic accounting. Business administration. Things I had once been told were unnecessary. My apartment slowly filled with small signs of normal life. A bookshelf. A kitchen table. A second-hand couch I bought from someone moving out of town. And one afternoon I walked into the animal shelter outside Flagstaff. Not because I planned to adopt anything. Just because I had time to spare. Then I saw her. A small gray tabby cat sitting in the corner of a kennel. The tag on the cage said female, approximate 2 years old. She stared at me through the bars with calm, curious eyes. I asked the volunteer if I could hold her. The cat climbed onto my shoulder like she had already decided where she belonged. I named her Lucia. After my grandmother. Because that felt right. You know something strange about freedom? It's quieter than you expect. When I was lying in that shelter bed staring at the ceiling every night, I used to imagine what it would feel like to finally win. I thought it would feel dramatic. Triumphant. Like something out of a movie. Instead, it felt like waking up on a Saturday morning in a small apartment that belonged entirely to me. Making coffee. Feeding a cat. and realizing no one else controlled what happened next. That's freedom. I'm 29 years old now. I work full-time at a law office in Flagstaff. I'm finishing my second semester of community college. I have a reliable car, a small apartment, and a cat who sheds on every piece of clothing I own. I haven't spoken to my parents since the day that letter was mailed. Maybe someday that will change. Maybe it won't. But the difference now is simple. The choice is mine. My grandmother once wrote something in the letter she left inside that briefcase. I didn't mention it earlier. It was the last line. Freedom isn't free, Elena. But you're worth every dollar it costs. She was right. And if you're listening to this right now from a place where someone is telling you that wanting your own life makes you selfish, it doesn't. Wanting independence isn't betrayal. And walking away from people who are actively destroying your future isn't cruelty. Sometimes it's survival. If this story meant something to you, make sure you subscribe to Women Reddit Stories so you don't miss the next one. And if you want to hear what happened 6 months later when my mother unexpectedly showed up outside the law office where I worked, that story is waiting for you in the next video. I'll see you there.